So last Sunday we began just a brief 3-week little series as we start this new school year and as we prepare for the fall here in the parish. And we're just calling this series, be imitators of God. Be imitators of God. This is a simple command that Paul gives us from the 5th chapter of his letter to the Ephesians, which we read last week. But Paul just casually, almost like just as if if it's not that big of a deal, he just kind of lofts this out there and says, oh yeah, just imitate God. Easy, see ya. Okay, but like when you begin to think about it, it's easy to read this and be like, oh, that's so beautiful, Paul. It's so pious of you to say, I want to imitate God. Me too. But if you think about it, that's a ludicrous thing to say because it's impossible. Again, we did the comparison last week. Like, it's impossible for us to imitate an Olympic athlete. We can't even do that. Like, that's impossible. And that's just like flipping around or something. But then Paul says, hey, just imitate God. It's like, no, Paul, I don't know if you know how life works. That's impossible. Actually, totally impossible. And yet that's the beauty of our faith. That's the beauty of our faith. What our faith gives to us is not just, again, some nice things to think about or nice little rules. No, it's our faith is, hey, you actually can imitate God. You actually can share in his life. God gives you that. That's what our faith gives to us. If you've ever been to Mass on Christmas morning, we read from the 1st chapter of John's Gospel, and there's this beautiful little phrase in there where it says, and to those who believe in him, to those who have faith in him, he gave them the power to become children of God. And this is just something that's given to us. And so that's why Paul will then go on to say other crazy things. But he says that one crazy line that every athlete has tattooed to their body, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And Paul's not talking to athletes about how if they believe in Jesus, they're going to win a gold medal. Because again, just logically, what happens when 2 athletes have that tattooed to their body and they're both going for the same goal? Like, Jesus have to pick his favorite? Like, what's going on? Okay, so obviously that's not what Paul's talking about. What Paul is talking about is, hey, you know that impossible thing that I keep talking about? You know how I keep telling you that you should imitate God, share in his life? Guess what? You can do that. All of that through Christ who gives you strength, Philippians 4:13. That's when Paul will then go on to say the other lines that he talks about, the other examples from athletes of, hey, but you need to run the race. You need to be disciplined. You need to train, so to speak. You need to have a single-mindedness. And that's what Paul's always getting at. He's like, we need to be like Olympic athletes. That same dedication and self-sacrifice, that same sort of single-mindedness that an Olympian has in order to go after that prize, that's the same thing the exact same thing that we need when it comes to our faith. That's what Paul's talking about. We have to live our faith that way. The same dedication, single-mindedness, self-sacrifice, that's what we need to live our faith. So for today, though, one of the other things that fascinates me about the Olympics, there are many, but one of them is just how much the Olympic Games have expanded. I don't know if you've realized that. The Olympics have really exploded into what they are today. From such humble beginnings, just like a few simple, essential little sports, now it's just this worldwide phenomenon. I checked the stats for you. There were 10,500 athletes at the Olympics this year from 206 countries. Woof, that's a lot. Okay, there was 32 different sports with 329 events, so 329 gold medals that you could win. Right? That is incredible. The growth, the expansion that the Olympics have had. They started off so humble thousands of years ago there in Greece. There was about 100 athletes. They all came from one country. It was Greece. There were 7 sports, and there were 7 medals. There weren't even medals. It was just like this little laurel olive branch wreath crown sort of a thing that you get on top of your head. It's like, congrats, enjoy life. That was it. But then, when the modern Olympics started, so that'd be back in 1896, the modern Olympics started with 241 athletes, so not much better. Okay, they represented 14 countries. That was a little bit better. And there was only 10 sports and 43 events. 43 medals. That's it. But again, by focusing on the essentials, the Olympics began to grow and to grow and to grow and to expand and to expand and to expand to the point that now we have 10,000 athletes, 206 countries, 32 sports, 329 events. Like it's exploded, right? It's like over 200%, not 200%, it's like 20,000% growth. It's 200 times the growth. It's huge. It's a huge growth. But how they do it? They just focus on the essential, like sport itself. This is what we're focusing on. And by doing that, it just continued to grow and to grow and to grow. They've pruned things. They've added some things. I'm still voting for basket weaving whenever that comes up again. I don't know if you've ever seen competitive basket weaving. It's pretty fun. But again, they focus on the essentials. And it explodes. Okay, when it comes to our faith, like if you want to peek behind the curtains of the craziness of my mind and the craziness of what I do, right, this is also the craziness that I employ all the time. It's that focus on the essentials. What is essential to our faith? If I was going to summarize all of the crazy ideas I have and all the dumb decisions that I make around here, it's because it's trying to answer that question. Does this help us to focus on the essentials? Is this thing that we're going to do, or is this thing that I'm going to talk about, is it essential to our faith? Is this something essential? And why? The reason that I do that, the reason why I focus so much on the essentials, there's a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is because of the times that we live in. Okay, the times that we live in, it calls us, it demands us to focus on those essential things. I've said before, our age, the time that we live in, it's best characterized as a new apostolic age. Pope Francis has talked about that. Bishop Kemi has talked about that a lot. I just plagiarize everything I say. I talk about the essentials, and I plagiarize everything. Right. Our time is a new apostolic age. Right. What they're getting at is, as Pope Francis said this, our age is not so much an age of change, but a change of the age itself. It's not so much an age of change, but a change of the age itself. What he's getting at is, all right, we all know that things change really fast, right? I was born, I'm going to date myself, I was born in 1993, so I'm very old. Back then, they didn't have cell phones or the internet, things like that. Like, that was not a real thing. And yet, in my lifetime, because I'm so old, right, all of that stuff has developed. It's been rapid change in technology, in government, in communication, everything. Rapid change. And so it's easy for us to say, man, things just change so fast these days. Change. So it's easy to say it. We live in an age of change. Pope Francis says, sure, but not really. The time that we live in, much more importantly, we have to know that the age itself has changed. There are certain times in the history of the world where you can draw just a straight line between everything that came before and everything that comes after. We live in this different time. A straight line down history has been drawn, and we're in a new age. And this new age is more like 33 AD and the time of the first apostles than it is like 1950, less than 100 years ago. The age that we live in, the times that we live in, are much more similar to 33 AD in the time of the first apostles than it was and is to 1950. Why? What do I mean? Lots of reasons. Again, so many reasons. One of the things is that just like the time of the first Christians in 33 AD, we live in a time where people are very indifferent and apathetic to the Christian message. I don't know if you've realized that or kind of recognize that. Most people just don't care. Like if you went up to somebody and started talking about Jesus, they'd be like, please don't talk to me about Jesus. And then they'd say, I don't really care. It's like, that's people's attitude. Fine, okay. But that's the attitude. Also, at the exact same time, people are incredibly hostile towards our faith, just in very subversive and secret ways. I know it's easy, and people put these headlines on the headlines about how, the government's going after the Catholic Church, so-and-so's going after the church. Sure, great, try. Like in every court case, we're going to win. Like the religious freedom in America is pretty solid. We're going to be fine. That's not the persecution we have to worry about. The one we have to worry about is that story of the man from China I talk about all the time, that I'm not going to tell again today. The persecution that we face is very subtle. It's a persecution that seems all light and fluffy, but it sucks the faith right out of us, to the point that where a man, when he lived in China, was ready to die for his faith, but comes to the United States, and within a couple months, it's gone. That's the persecution that we face. That's the kind of times that we live in. Another big one is that it's no longer cool to follow Jesus. Again, 1950, if you said, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, people would be like, oh, righteous, nice, good going, nice, we all are. Nowadays, it's like, oh, bigot, Right? People are just like, oh, you follow Jesus? Nice. Now I know a lot about you. Again, it's not cool to follow Jesus anymore. We live in an age where following Christ, it literally divides fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, brothers and sisters. You can look at your own family, and we all know that. We have all got them. It has divided us. That's much more like 33 AD than 1950. Okay, one last one is just, again, the new dominant religion of our day. For even a lot of people that call themselves Christians, the new dominant religion of our day is more of a vague spiritualism where everybody believes in God or the gods, just like 33 AD. But it's more just like, I believe in this God thing, and that's it. They don't believe in the God that's revealed himself to us in history and in tradition and in the scriptures. They don't believe in Jesus. Jesus was just a nice guy. They don't believe in the church. They don't believe in anything Jesus really taught. The spiritualism that they believe in is, well, you just need to be a good person and believe in God and be nice. And then we all go to heaven one day. Like, that's the religion of our day. Okay, this is the age that we live in. And this is a new age. The age itself has changed. And in this age, in an age like the time of the apostles, what's called for is a return to the essentials, just like the time of the apostles. The apostles didn't have a lot of time on their hands, and they only had time to focus on what was most important and what was most essential. And so that's the method behind my madness. Right, what do I talk about all the time, and what do I do around here? I don't know if you remember, you guys all laughed behind my backs a year and a half ago. Remember when I did that rerouting thing, and you were all just like, it's okay. I wasn't offended. It's fine. But it was kind of a dumb title. I'll admit that. Okay. But what was rerouting? Rerouting was just me for 12 weeks just talking about the kerygma, aka just the fundamental story of what our faith is, the fundamental, essential proclamation of faith. That was it. 12 weeks doing that. Right after that, during the Easter season, we then spent a whole bunch of weeks talking about one tiny little phrase from Acts of the Apostles, Acts 2:42, where we were told about the 4 essential things that the church did. At the very first Pentecost, when the church first began, we were told they were dedicated themselves to the teaching of the apostles, they dedicated themselves to the breaking of the bread, the Eucharist, they dedicated themselves to the prayers and to the community. That was it. The 4 most essential things that they focused on right at the beginning, right there. We then spent a solid amount of time the next several weeks after that talking about evangelization, how the fundamental task and mission of the church is to evangelize, is to share our faith with others. That's why we exist, is to share this kerygma, this faith with others. We then spent several weeks during the summer talking about faith and like faith itself. You remember that? Watch this. See, you can think I'm crazy, but watch. You remember that dumb story I kept telling about that guy that would walk on the tightrope across the Niagara Falls? You remember. I win. Right, what was I talking about, though? That's an image of faith. It's one thing to say, whoa, that guy's cool. He can walk across a tightrope. It's another thing to say, I'm going to get in that wheelbarrow that he's pushing across the tightrope. That's faith. It's one thing to say, oh, Jesus is a nice guy, and I'm sure he's pretty important. It's another thing to say, I'm going to hop in Jesus' wheelbarrow, and wherever he goes, I'm going to go. Whatever he teaches, I'm going to follow. Whatever he says to do, I'm going to do it. That's faith. We talked about that for several weeks. We talked about metanoia, this change of mind that we need. We talked about turning the world upside down and the witness to our faith that we need to give. Another dumb title, we did reconnecting, classic. What was that? 10 weeks talking about prayer. We then spent all of Easter, all of it, talking about that revolutionary, concrete way of living called Reclaiming Sunday. What do I do? What do I talk about all the time? I've never once talked about the 9 choirs of angels, although I could. I've never talked about the history of Trinitarian debates and the differences between the Monergists and the Semi-Sabellians. Never once talked about that, although I could. I've never talked about the importance of relics. I've never talked about cool devotions. Those are all very true and very important and good things. Those are not essential things. In this new apostolic age, we have to recover and focus our attention and our energy on what is most essential to our faith. In a few weeks, we're going to start a new thing, focusing on the essential thing called Scripture itself, the Bible. We focus on the essentials. And when we then do that, with the essential things, we're then called to, like St. Paul teaches us, to live those with a dedication through sacrifice, a single-minded intent to focus on those and to live them out, as if we were Olympians training for the Olympics. That's what we need. That's the craziness of my methods. Okay, so when you hear then Paul talk about in our second reading, Paul says in our second reading, right after that passage of imitate God, he says, watch carefully how you live. Right? You know how you're living right now? Think about that. Watch carefully how you live, not as a foolish person, but as a wise one. Don't act foolishly anymore. Right? Things are different. We need to act wisely. Make the most of the opportunity because these days are evil. Therefore, don't continue in ignorance, but try to understand what's the will of the Lord. Okay, what's Paul getting at? Back in 1950, when everyone was Catholic or Christian, you just kind of had to go with the flow. The age has changed, and we're in a time much more like the time of Paul. These days are evil, Paul would say, about his time, but about ours as well. And not like, again, everyone's going on the streets shooting each other. That's not what he means. He's saying, you know how if you just kind of casually go along, the faith gets sucked right out of you? That's the problem. That's what's going on. Right? These days, when we just go with the flow, if you just, kind of throw your kids into school and say, you'll figure it out, what happens? We've watched what happens. It doesn't work like that anymore. We live in a new age where if there isn't an incredible dedication and focus on this singular goal, man, we're going to be in trouble. And so that's what Paul says. We need to make that real, intentional, concerted effort to pursue our faith, to make that decision personally, as spouses, as families, to say this is what we have to focus our attention on. This is the one thing that we need to pursue above all others, to focus on the essentials. And as I've said before, and as our gospel then alludes to today, the most essential thing, the source and summit of our Christian faith, the most essential thing when it comes to living out our faith is, as Jesus says, this living bread that comes down from heaven. This Sunday Eucharist and this Sunday day, the whole day. This is what Jesus said in our gospel today. Jesus said, believe in God and be a good person. Oh, sorry, just making sure the triplets were paying attention in the back there. Okay. Jesus didn't say that. No, okay. I know you were all like, wait, what? No, Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said this, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you don't have life in you. What? What happened to believe in God and be a nice person, Jesus? No, Jesus said, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you don't have life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Like, that's it. Okay, Jesus is really saying we got to focus on this essential thing. And so especially as we begin this new school year, it's always just a good time to kind of reset and rethink, restart. It's a great time just to make that commitment once again to the essential practice of the Sunday Eucharist and reclaiming Sunday as the Lord's day. As I said before, I think I've shared this before, long before the church ever said, oh yeah, it's a rule, you have to go to Mass on Sundays, long before that was ever officially decreed, the earliest documents that we have from the first Christians, right? This is less than 100 years after Jesus, less than 100 years. There was already the firmly established practice to gather each and every Sunday to celebrate the Eucharist. It was already there. And what's more, people were willing to die for it. Very soon after this document was put out, the Emperor of Rome decreed, those gatherings y'all are doing, no, can't do that no more. It's illegal. But they kept doing it. And they were caught, and they were imprisoned, and in the trial manuscripts, because Rome just recorded everything, in the trial manuscripts, we get this line from them, their defense. Without fear of any kind, we've celebrated the Eucharist because it cannot be missed. We cannot live without the Eucharist. That's a line of, this is essential. We can't just sidestep this one. The Sunday Eucharist is one of those essential parts of our faith. And so this is what we hear. Right? This is what we hear from the first apostolic age. Just those first couple of decades right after Jesus. That's their essential practice. And so in this new apostolic age, that's one of those things that we have to reclaim, to recommit ourselves to. From the beginning, right, with just a little over 100 people, the Olympics, exploded. From the beginning, the church, our faith, just a few hundred people, it exploded into this worldwide phenomenon. Here, us today, 137 people, a little over 100 people. The faith can explode again, but it takes that focus on the essentials, and it takes that dedicatedness, that single-mindedness that Paul encourages us each and every single day.